Hi everyone, it's Roger and James here from the What's on Disney Plus podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Monsters University. So with the upcoming Monsters at Work series dropping soon onto Disney Plus, we thought we'd go back and watch kind of the prequel. We've already done one for the Monsters Inc. And we thought, well, why not do this one as well? So what did you think kind of going back and rewatching Monsters University?
So I'd only seen this one once prior to this, unlike Monsters Inc., which I'd saw dozens of times. And it was better than I remembered it being. I remember it being kind of underwhelmed when I saw it back.
Yeah.
I think when it was still in theaters. I think I saw this in theaters. And being a bit underwhelmed there. It holds up better now, having rewatched it. Maybe because I watched Monsters Inc. so recently. But it's also it's still not at the point where I'm like, yeah, I'm really glad they made this movie instead of X other movie.
Yeah, it's kind of that thing, isn't it, where you look at it and go, this really still didn't need to exist. It's still just we didn't need this, and it actually didn't necessarily help them. Kind of, I mean, it didn't train them for what they were doing. I mean, it's kind of funny watching it back now. It does look in a completely different level to, I think, like we said when we watched Monsters Inc. about it still looks good for its age, but it's still a little bit fuzzy around the edges. This was like, no, this one's not fuzzy around the edges. It looks so much better, obviously being that much later, but the technology's moved on that much. I was like, that could have been released yesterday, and I don't think I would have had noticed any different.
I think the only thing I noticed was the water. And it's only in the one scene when, they get tossed out of the library, or literally tossed out of the library, and they land in the pond, and like, oh yeah, well, they could have used the water that they developed for Moana or Frozen 2 or something like that, and it would definitely look a lot better. But that's such a small thing. It's a thing in like one scene for a handful of seconds. Otherwise, it's like, oh, this looks great. The technology has definitely moved forward a lot since Monsters Inc.
And I also felt as well like this was very much like Mike's movie. This was his movie. Yes. It was his story. He was the main character. Because Sully's a jerk, really. He's not a nice. It's like if this movie came first, he wouldn't have been a very liked character, because he's it's not really till the very, very end, and he finally has that kind of moment of like them becoming best friends and all the rest of it. But for most of the series, for the most of the movies, it's not really that great.
No, he is actually the primary antagonist of the movie, I would say. I mean, Nathan Fillion's character is certainly an antagonist as well, but maybe not even Sully himself. Like, the idea that we go into it of them being friends is almost the enemy in a way. It's like, oh, but they're not. And it kind of annoyed me a little bit because we watched Monsters Inc. He's like, you've been living in my shadow since like 4th grade or something. It's like, but they met in college.
Yeah.
and he can write it off. It's just hyperbole. But at the same time, there were a couple of things in the movie where like, wait, how does this line up with what was in Monsters Inc.?
Yeah, it's kind of I think as well, especially with Monsters University, that whole era was bang on when Disney Infinity was just coming out. And obviously, we did the Infinity podcast, and we were doing loads. So I just remember doing loads of videos and content on what was in the play set that came with it. And I think that kind of, in some way, I had so much more knowledge of this whole movie because of that video game and stuff. And it was like, oh, they really did kind of lean in on all of this. And there's sections of the movie which it did feel a little bit stretched out. Like, did we need all this? I'll be honest, if I ever watched it again, I don't think I'd be that worried. It's kind of it's very middle tier. I mean, it's a very good, well-made movie, but I put it very much at the bottom end of, it's like, yeah, it's fine, but if you never watched it or you didn't watch it ever again, you really wouldn't be missing much.
No, and I think a lot of the problem with it is that they wanted to tell two different stories. They wanted to tell the college story, Animal House or something like that, where, the zany antics of these misfits in college. And they also wanted to tell an origin story of Mike and Sully, and the two really don't go together at all. They tried very hard to get them to work together, and it just did not. And so if they had used two different characters, with Mike and Sully being more like Randall as a side character, like, haha, Monsters Inc., these are the characters, and instead had other main characters, it might have worked much better. Or if they'd gone a completely different route and just maybe not done this and
Well,
done
yeah.
a different story for Mike and
I
Sully,
think
it would have been better.
and I think that's what's interesting about this upcoming Monsters at Work series. Of they're going to be in it, but I don't, they're not going to be the main characters. They're not going to be the main ones we're focused on. I mean, that might work in their favor and like not connecting it to this movie, but kind of watching it back, you're going, just Sully's lazy. He's just, he relies on one thing he can roar. That's his entire setup, and Mike is the one that's the intelligent one behind it, and I thought that worked very well, and it set him up as a much more well-rounded character. Because in the first movie, it's the opposite. Kind of, Sully's kind of the main character that everyone falls in love with, and Mike is the lesser one. He's the one that's kind of worried and running around, and I don't know. It's such a weird movie, really. Of it kind of helped Mike, but kind of didn't really help me with liking Sully.
Yeah, and although you touched on something that I did like about this movie, which is the basic moral of it is solid, and something that I think needs to come up more, which is not everyone is good at everything, and you really need to play to your strengths. There's that underlying theme that Mike's not scary. He really is not scary. I mean, there's the oddity factor to him. Like if he popped up in my closet, it'd be kind of like, wow, you're weird. You're very strange looking. Whereas if Sully popped up in your closet and he was in monster mode, you'd be like, yeah.
But the thing is, and this is the thing with fears, and I like the whole aspect of it, of like they said about like the kid being scared of snakes, and therefore he wouldn't be scared of Sully because he's not. And it's like, having seen my wife's reaction to snakes, I can detect, someone like us, Randall would be much more scary at that point of of his reptilian look. Whereas obviously some people are scared of bears and kind of how that works, but Mike could be creepy. And what I really loved was that scene where he is playing every little horror trick on the adults and like literally just blew them away because he knew how to play every little part perfectly to get them so terrified. And he did it to adults. He didn't even do it to kids. And I mean, the whole thing of when he comes back and the principal's like, "What did you just do?" And then but then he kind of look at it, he didn't make any use of that in Monsters Inc.
Right. But that's what I mean. Like where they're talking about play to your strengths.
Yeah.
Mike's strengths are setting the scene, setting the tension, rustle the curtains, kind of make the weird noises, the things that are get just out of sight, which don't work in a kid's room. Because in the kid room, you really just want to go for the straight scare, which is Sully's specialty. But also with the Uzma Kappa guys, they all got tossed out of but it's because they weren't using their skills in the right way. Like that one guy who just sneak up on anybody. That's a skill. Why wasn't he using that? And that whole scene in the library is just a great demonstration of there's no one solution, and you need to use what you're good at to get to finish the project.
And also just working as a team. I think there's a lot of good moral stories to it, but it's like it's easy to kind of gloss over it all. I mean, it's a really good movie, but it's very much sort of like I say, middle of the road, where once you've seen it, I don't think it's like it's not. I mean, the reason why Monsters Inc. is quite often trending on Disney Plus and Monsters University isn't.
Yeah, no, Monsters Inc. was a breath of fresh air. It was right at the beginning of Pixar, and they were doing all sorts of fun stuff. And Monsters U really was right in that. We kind of that impression that they ran out of ideas, because you got Monsters U, you got Finding Dory, Toy Story 4, Incredibles 2, and it's like, they're not bad movies, but why do they exist? Like we've talked about Toy Story 4 plenty of times. Like it's a perfectly fine movie. It's fun. It's got action scenes, but like the series ended with Toy Story 3. There's a definitive ending in Toy Story 3. Why do we have Toy Story 4? This should not be here.
That's very. I like I said, it's a good movie. I think having watched these two movies, I'm much more in the zone now of like looking forward to this upcoming series. I still feel a little bit like, did we need it? But it's kind of hard to imagine. I mean, the Monsters at Work series was one of the first Disney Plus series that they announced years ago, and it kind of got delayed and delayed and delayed. And I'm like, and we're finally going to be getting it. So it's we've said about like watching these movies before that movie came out, before the series comes out, and like years we've been talking about it. It's like we're finally at that point where we can do it. Just imagine when we can actually watch Rogue One, because that was even before that. I mean, that series was announced like 2000, what, 18, 2017.
There were rumors of that series before Disney Plus was even a thing.
Yeah, I remember, like, yeah, it was one of the series of like when What's on Disney Plus was called something completely different. That was in the pre early days of before the name change, where I was covering it, where it was just like this streaming, because we hadn't even got a name yet. And yeah, so it's kind of quite funny, really, of how long we've had to wait for this series, but definitely worth watching. I definitely say watch Monsters Inc. If you've only got the chance to watch 2, watch that one. If you've got time before the new series drops, watch them both. But final thoughts on this one?
Speaking of monsters at work, I would actually enjoy if they brought some of these characters back as cameos, because obviously many of them were not in Monsters Inc., but the Uzma Kappa characters had potential, and I'd like to see more of them, even if it isn't just a brief cameo.
Yeah, just have the Squishy guy turn up at some point.
The Squishy guy was great.
Yeah, but let us know in the comments below what you think of Monsters University. Love to hear your thoughts. And go check us out over at whatsondisneyplus.com. A huge thank you to all of our patrons and YouTube channel members who get early access to these episodes and also get to influence what we watch. And on that note, guys, thank you very much. See you guys soon. Later.